This is a story that's going to break your heart and get you to trust issues in all the acquired relationships you have in this world. A man went fishing and suddenly vanished into thin air without any trace. The man was an experienced fisherman, but the water body he was at was not a good place to be, because it was full of fierce alligators. Many thought he just fell down in the water and became prey to those gators. But is it? Did he fall down, or was he pushed from the boat? Or was there something more foul play involved in it? You see, questions are many, but the answers we need to find out. December 16th, 2000. Mike Williams, a 31-year-old guy from Tallahassee, leaves his home even before sunrise. He plans an easy day of duck hunting on Lake Seminole. He's hunted this spot many times before. He knows what he's doing, and he has plans. His wife, Denise, is expecting him to return home by noon so the two of them can celebrate their wedding anniversary. But at noon, Mike is nowhere to be found. She calls around her friends, family, to see if anyone's heard from him. No one has. Hours later, the authorities show up and a full-on search is immediately started. The rescue teams are on the water by boat, helicopters scanning from above, the whole 9 yards. They find Mike's truck and boat trailer still parked at the launch. And then out on the lake, they spot his empty boat just drifting. Inside, his hunting gear is still there, decoys, shotgun, but no life jacket. And most importantly, just no sign of Mike. Now, one thing you need to know, Lake Seminole is no friendly body of water. It's shallow, full of hidden stumps and crawling with alligators. So the immediate theory? He must have fallen in and gotten eaten. It's grim, but to the search teams it makes sense at first. But then something weird happens. After weeks of searching, nothing turns up. No body, no clothes, no gear. And it is strange because even in alligator attacks, something always turns up. That's when experts start questioning the whole idea. Could a man just disappear without a trace? It doesn't add up. No one is more sure of that than Mike's mother, Cheryl Williams. She does not believe that her son simply had an accident. In her head, this had to be a murder, and she isn't about to let it go. For literally years, Cheryl fights for answers. She hands out missing person flyers, stands outside churches with signs, and erects billboards. And even she writes a letter to the governor of Florida every day for 9 years, demanding that they reopen the case. For 17 years, the official story is that Mike drowned and the alligators got him. Cheryl never does buy it, however, and slowly but surely, there is a growing number of people questioning what exactly happened. The whole thing simply unravels slowly into something much darker. See, Mike was not some guy who just walked off into the sunset. He had a life, a wife, a daughter, a real estate appraisal business that had matured. He worked hard, but he was incredibly devoted to his family. When his daughter was born in 1999, he was ecstatic. A local TV station even recorded the enthusiasm he shared about how much he respected Denise and women who endured childbirth in general. Everything was perfect, and then, 19 months later, gone. One of the first people on the scene when Mike disappeared, his longtime best friend, Brian Winchester, helped with the search and even found Mike's abandoned boat. The search went on for 44 days, an emotional roller coaster for everyone involved. But eventually, officials called it off. However, everyone could understand that something wasn't right, because he was not a man who had just run away. And as the years went on, the truth, buried deep, was bound to surface. The authorities still tried to work on the first thoughts that Mike Williams was a gator food item. After all, he had gone out to Lake Seminole duck hunting, and something had probably occurred out there that the gators would not leave much for him. In fact, some on the rescue team thought that he was probably down there, deep underwater, and not discoverable. In one report, the individual said outright that he probably was torn up and that the remains were impossible to find. Most people actually bought into the theory except Cheryl Williams. After 6 months passed with nothing turned up, no clue, no leads, just quiet. And then, seemingly out of nowhere, a fisherman spotted a strange sight. The waders Mike was wearing that day, floating on the water. That was weird enough, but then 2 days later, more of his stuff popped up. His hunting jacket, his fishing license, a flashlight. Search teams had combed that area over and over, and now suddenly, his belongings were appearing. It seemed extremely fishy. Even with all that, however, there was no sign of Mike himself. In the meantime, his wife Denise was moving on. She had their 2-year-old daughter to take care of, and friends said was focused on being a good mom. But money was becoming an issue. A family friend, Scott Dungy, later recalled how he helped her sell off assets to get by while she waited on Mike's life insurance payout. And it wasn't just a little cash we're talking about. Mike had 3 life insurance policies worth over $1.75 million. His financial advisor, Clay Ketchum, had encouraged him to get them just in case, since he was always out hunting and fishing. Despite the ongoing investigation, Denise did not waste time in filing those insurance claims. Journalist Jennifer Portman, who covered the case, later pointed out how quickly Denise accepted that Mike was gone, almost too quickly. While search teams were still looking, she was already making moves to collect the money. But Florida law wasn't on her side. Normally, a person had to be missing for 5 years before they could be declared legally dead, unless there was solid evidence of their death. But Denise didn't want to wait, so within 6 months she pushed for a ruling, using the discovery of Mike's waders, vest, and license as proof. A judge agreed, and just like that, Mike Williams was officially declared dead. Accidental drowning during a duck hunting trip. Case closed, still no body, but legally he was gone. But his mom, Cheryl Williams, still didn't believe any of it, and she started keeping a log of all inconsistencies she could find. 27 pages worth of unanswered questions. One thing gnawed in particular. How had those waders survived at the bottom of the lake for 6 months? It's a really burning question. But before we look into the answers, we have a request for you. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel because it's just one click for you, but a hell lot of motivation for us to do all the research work and present these videos. So if you love these true crime stories, specifically our works, don't hesitate to like and share this video and subscribe to this channel. Let's get back to the case of the day. Mike's wife Denise wanted Cheryl to drop the case and move on too. What's striking is that she even threatened her. If Cheryl didn't stop digging, she'd be cut off from her granddaughter. Now that seems a little suspicious. Why is she so desperate to move on? Why does she have no interest in knowing the truth of the death of her husband? But anyway, it's good that Cheryl didn't care about the threats. She went straight to an expert, Matthew Oresco, who basically said, yeah, no, that's not how gators work. Turns out alligators don't even eat in cold weather, and they definitely don't just swallow a whole person without leaving a trace. So that gator theory? Completely busted, but already the case was a mess. However, in the meantime, Cheryl only pushed the case with her 27 pages of comprehensive notes. She had years of gathering every strange little detail, every inconsistency, and finally, in 2004, 4 years since Mike's disappearance, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, FDLE, took notice. Investigators met with Cheryl, listened to her, and suddenly, what once seemed like a hunting accident started looking a whole lot more like foul play. That's when Derek Wester, an old investigator, comes in. He talks to Cheryl and alarms start blaring. Of course, something is not right, especially when she mentions the life insurance policies Mike held. The biggest red flag, a $1 million policy he had taken out just months before disappearing into thin air. And the guy who sold him the policy, Brian Winchester, Mike's best friend since high school. Mike and Brian were like brothers. They did everything together, married their high school sweethearts, bought houses, and started families. Everything seemed picture perfect from the outside, but then investigators dug a little deeper. It turned out that Mike's wife Denise and Brian had been a little too close. Turns out they weren't just friends anymore, they were having an affair. Now, Brian working in insurance made the sale of Mike's policy seem normal at first. But then things started to look too good to be true. Just when Denise needed proof of death to collect that $1 million payout, Mike's waders were discovered in Lake Seminole. Apparently, they had been underwater for 6 months, but they looked suspiciously new. No slime, no decay. Naturally, now you can easily understand it was a setup. The clothes were never underwater, they were planted planfully. Investigators couldn't prove who planted them, but their suspicions locked onto Denise and Brian. And here's where it gets even more twisted. Years later, Brian divorced his wife, Kathy, and married Denise. As a result, investigators were so convinced Denise had a role in Mike's disappearance that they even attended the wedding. At one point, the minister said something about how the couple had no secrets. And let's just say, not everyone in the room believed that. Bit by bit, the case started coming together. The insurance money, the alligator story, and the conveniently discovered waders all pointed to something much more nefarious. Denise and Brian started getting grilled by the investigators. Denise? Ice cold. No emotion. Just flat, detached answers. Brian, on the other hand, tried to cover his tracks. He swore he'd been 60 miles away, asleep in bed the morning Mike disappeared. He even said he was supposed to go hunting with his father-in-law, but overslept. No wonder it was a nice alibi. But detectives weren't buying it. A witness who knew Brian swore they saw him at Lake Seminole that morning. When shown a lineup, they picked him out without hesitation. And then came Brian's ex-wife, Kathy Aldridge. She spoke up finally with the information that Brian and Denise had been playing around long before Mike disappeared. But even that new information had investigators stymied. Even 2 years since reopening the case, they couldn't crack the case wide open. But in secrets this massive, it just was a question of time till everything unraveled. Once again, Cheryl Williams fought hell and high water to keep it alive, standing outside the church with protest signs, plastering billboards across town, and writing letters to the governor every single day for 9 years. That's 1,472 letters. She never stopped believing that Brian and Denise knew more than they were letting on, especially Denise. But without a confession, the truth stayed buried. By 2012, things weren't going so well for Brian and Denise. 7 years into their marriage, things started falling apart. They separated, and Brian was so desperate to win her back that he did everything in his power. Therapy, counseling, whatever it took. Nothing worked, and after 4 years of rejection, something inside him just snapped. One morning, Denise got into her car like any other day, except this time she wasn't alone. She caught a movement in the back seat, and it was Brian. Armed with a gun and a tarp, he wasn't there for a friendly chat. Denise panicked, begging for her life, but Brian just told her to stop crying. People might hear. Then in a twisted turn, he started talking about ending his own life. Denise escaped and ran straight to the police. Brian was taken into custody for kidnapping and aggravated assault. And suddenly, detectives had an opening. If they played this just right, perhaps they would finally get some answers about Mike. First, they turned to Denise, hoping she'd crack, but she stuck to her story. She claimed she never had any clue what happened to Mike. No way was she turning on Brian. So the heat shifted to him. With a long prison sentence hanging over his head, Brian was their last shot at the truth. And 16 months later, he finally pleaded guilty to kidnapping and assaulting Denise. His lawyers begged for a 15-year sentence and prosecutors wanted 45. Brian, clearly impassioned, testified he never in his life meant to harm Denise, but she wouldn't have it. She told the court she relived that terror every single day and wanted him locked away for life. Brian got 20 years. Shackled and led away, the prospects seemed grim for Mike's case, as if it would never be solved. But on the very next day, everything changed. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement held a press conference and dropped a bombshell. They had found Mike Williams's remains. And how, Brian finally confessed. In exchange for immunity from prosecution for the murder, he spilled everything. And what you are going to know now, the truth, or should we say Brian's story, was really chilling. He met Mike that morning at a gas station to follow him for an early hunting trip on Lake Seminole. On getting on the water, he forced Mike to stand up in the boat and then pushed him overboard. His plan was for Mike to drown, but Mike started flailing to keep his head above the water. Brian panicked without even considering this action. He pulled out his shotgun and shot Mike at point-blank range. From there, it was full-out cover-up time. He drives Mike's body 60 miles out to the middle of a remote marsh area, buries him, and ditches Mike's truck and trailer at the lake to make an accident out of it. Later, he performs the grieving best friend role, shocked, giving support to poor Denise, 9 yards. After his confession, investigators initiated one of the most extensive searches in Florida history. They found Mike's skeletal remains, his wedding ring, and undeniable evidence that he was executed. Forensics confirmed it. Mike was shot in the face at close range. Cold, calculated, brutal. The truth was finally out. Brian Winchester finally cracked under the pressure and spilled his beans. And as you guessed, it was Denise Williams, the real brains behind this operation. As far as Brian knew, Denise did not want a messy divorce. Murder would be cleaner that way. The shame of separation would not fall upon her once she became a widow. Plus, the life insurance check was worth $2 million, and they were going to make it all come together. A life with each other, no more hurdles, and a fat bank account to save her. Then Mike's body was discovered. Suddenly, there she was, Denise in handcuffs, awaiting charges of first-degree murder, conspiracy, and accessory after the fact. But how did she respond? There were no tears, no freakout, only a blank expression as her life came crashing around her. Her lawyer, Ethan Way, was adamant that she was not guilty, claiming Denise had no idea about the murder. However, prosecutor John Fuchs painted a much different picture. One in which Denise had planned the whole affair in the first place, simply to maintain her image as a grieving widow, rather than being a divorcee. The kicker was that her boyfriend, Brian Winchester, testified that he and Denise had made a pact of silence. As long as neither of them spoke, the truth would remain buried, literally. Now, Brian admitted he was the one who actually pulled the trigger, and the defense pounced on that. They called him a convicted killer, a liar, someone you just couldn't trust. But the prosecution had backup. Then there was Brian's ex-wife, Kathy, who dropped a chilling footnote. Years later, when Brian kidnapped Denise, she had sent him a message telling him to shut his trap. After deliberating through 3 days of intense testimony, both parties rested their cases. The defense rolled the dice, making no move to allow the jury to consider lesser charges. It was full acquittal or nothing. Then came closing arguments. The prosecution has hammered Denise's role in this crime, while the defense insisted there wasn't a shred of real evidence tying her to it. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. Verdict? Guilty. Conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. After 18 years, Mike's family finally got justice. And Cheryl Williams, the mother who never stopped fighting for the truth, could finally lay her son to rest. This is an extremely disappointing and depressing case, where both your loving wife and best friend from childhood are playing against you. Only your mother is your last hope in the whole world. What are your thoughts about it? Share your views in the comments below. And if you want to know some more twisted case and much like Hollywood thriller, watch this one where you will encounter twists in every minute. Subscribe to the channel for more true crime content like this. See you soon.